Good afternoon, just. Welcome to the latest in the Q&A and briefings that we're doing from CityCo. Today we wanted to look at what is already happening in offices and public realm. I'm hoping that everybody can hear me all right. Nobody's looking too confused, so I'm going to assume that's okay. So we've got a couple of guests to talk to us first and talk through what they've already been doing for the past 2 or 3 weeks. And then we've got a really interesting presentation from Arup, actually looking at how do we model people in public spaces, which is useful obviously for both public realm and for buildings. First up, we've got Erinle from Allied London, who's going to be talking mostly about public realm, which obviously is a major issue for them. And then Toby Smith from CBRE talking about tenants, landlords and offices. And then Graham Stewart and Tony Nichols from Arup, who will be taking us through some of their modelling techniques that they're developing at the moment, which are really useful in looking at how we make buildings work. As I say, if there are any questions, please put them on the chat. We can ask them at the end. There are a number of things that have already been pre-submitted, so we will go to those. Thank you very much. Gabe, do you want to start?
Yeah, thanks for that, Vaughan. Hello, everyone. Yeah, just wanted to start off with a brief introduction to Spinningfields, which, according to us anyway, is arguably the most successful urban regeneration project in Europe. We have 16 buildings, over 22 acres of land, which is locked between Deansgate, Quay Street, Bridge Street, and the River Irwell. Approximately 175 businesses work on Spinningfields, with an estimated 25,000 workers working on the estate Monday to Friday in normal times. We do have an apartment block on Spinningfields at Left Bank, which houses 391 apartments, which are all fully occupied. Now, our take onto this really challenging time with the pandemic has been to understand the guidelines and make sure we're interpreting government guidance correctly. And that was the initial strategy. We sat down and did a critical analysis of our assets and overlaid it over our existing risk assessment to make sure that we could cover our already existing hazards and incorporate the mitigation requirements for COVID-19. We drafted a strategy based around the mitigating requirements for COVID-19 and tried to predict and forecast our occupiers' requirements and ensuring that we stayed abreast with our statutory compliance obligations. We looked at the customer's journey, trying to see how our occupiers commute into and onto the estate, and how potentially the occupiers' own plans and proposals for the reoccupation of their buildings would interlink and interface with the public realm, with the dual ownership and dual responsibilities. As part of our analysis, the big thing that we came up with our strategy was communication. When we talked about communication, it was key for us to share our plans with our occupiers and make them understand what we were looking at and the proposals that we were looking to put forward in terms of the COVID-19 strategy, whilst also asking them to comment, feedback, and provide us and share their details with us. Signage strategies, so for wider communication with members of the public and normal users of the public realm was reviewed, and we're drafting, instructing, and we'll be installing over the next week or so. There was also quite an important communications piece between our estate management teams and our key workers who've continued to work throughout the pandemic. We went through a lot of retraining and providing inductions for those who were off or away and ill on the new protocols that we were introducing for social distancing and interactions with members of the public. Also critical was our communication with our key supply chains. As most of you will all be aware, trying to get certain products in this climate is like getting the proverbial rocking horse waste. It's not the easiest thing to do. Trying to get hand sanitizers, disposable gloves, automatic hand dispensers is extremely challenging. So it was critical for us to lock down our supplies with our supply chain and make sure that we had enough to continue to work for the foreseeable. So once we got all that down, we drafted a repopulation strategy, which we will be sharing with our occupiers, and with the key objectives, 5 key objectives: prevent the spread of COVID whilst people are on the state, protecting our team and others, encouraging social distancing, encouraging personal hygiene standards amongst our teams, and maintaining a high frequency cleaning regime on the frequent touch points on the public realm. Part of this strategy will include signage, as we discussed before. It looked at the pinch points on the estate, which we're creating in certain areas, one-way zones, and also in certain areas we'll be providing single file access. If people who are familiar with Spinningfields, the area called Scott Place, where Nando's and Halo Cupcake is one of those areas that will be single file only. I think a large part of our strategy is the buy-in of our occupiers and working collaboratively with everyone so that they understand what we're proposing to have in place, because obviously the enforcement of it is quite blurred. I don't think the police have had any powers to enforce social distancing, so it's all about making sure our communication is really, really clear, and any questions that our occupiers have, that we are able to communicate back to them so that they can further dispense that to their teams and their employees. We will be introducing hand sanitizer stations on the public realm, and we will one hand wash station so that people who are working can wash their hands if they prefer to. I think one of the biggest challenges that we will have is just maintaining the welfare facilities for our team, which we've completely had to revamp to ensure that there was adequate social distancing. We've taken out the basics, no more provision of cutlery and kitchen utensils in our kitchen areas, regular wipe downs of surfaces, all the things that you're probably all already familiar with and have already included in your plans. And what we're trying to do is also make sure that we keep up this regular dialogue with our occupiers as plans change. I think one of the biggest challenges is that we have a number of large buildings, tall buildings on Spinningfields, and having seen a few of the plans from different managing agents, some of them are proposing a single way, a one-way system into the building. A lot of people are considering staggering start times for the businesses, but that inevitably will lead to waiting times outside of the buildings. So coordinating queuing management systems on the public realm, whilst making sure that this does not have a negative impact on neighbours and thoroughfare routes for other occupiers, is quite critical and key for us to establish. We're working with our F&B providers, our retailers, on their reoccupation plans. A number of our occupiers of our restaurants have started operating on a click and collect basis and working with Deliveroo, and it is working with, because it doesn't require the numbers of people in the kitchens, and it maintains the social distancing protocols. We're providing support where we can for all our occupiers, and particularly our retailers on our social media channels, and also trying to use this time to foster a real sense of community. I think our relationship with the residents at Left Bank has never been better. The Thursday Clap for Key Workers has been phenomenally upheld. It sounds like a football stadium when you come down on Harborne Boulevard on Thursday night. So it's been a real testing time, difficult time, but I think there's a lot of lessons that have been learned from it, and we will continue to learn from it as things change.
Thanks for that, Gabe. One initial question is, obviously we don't know retail. We're looking at 15th of June and then opening a few weeks after that. You're looking at offices gradually starting to come back. I mean, how are you building sort of flexibility and resilience into what you're doing? Because all those schemes like one-way systems and whatever, they may end up not working as soon as you've got numbers back. So how are you continually reviewing and getting ready to adapt what you're doing?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's an ongoing process, as in we're putting down on paper what we can see at the moment, and part of, once we get guidance from the central government or a more clear indication from occupiers on when they're proposing to come back, we will be regularly reviewing these protocols. At the moment, we're anticipating that we will have to provide additional manning levels to student people around new protocols. So we're providing guidance and we're talking people through what's going to be required. We will have shared the plans to all our occupiers before they come back, so they should be well aware and in advance of what the new proposals will be. But we're going to be entering this with learning eyes. I think things will be changing on a regular basis, and we will just have to adapt accordingly. I don't think there's any tried or tested way that we can say this is definitive by any means, but we will carry on.
Not like a situation we've ever been through before, is it? So
absolutely, I think communication is going to be key, and talking to our occupiers and taking on board comments and new ideas that come on board is going to be critical.
And you've talked about sort of retraining your team a fair amount, and I can imagine that that's going to be ongoing as well. What's been the reaction of the team so far? Because I mean, talking to our host, for instance, you know, there's a fair amount of fear, reticence, concern about coming back, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's been the biggest part of our comms is we've had to maintain a workforce throughout the lockdown protocols. You can't deliver cleaning and security remotely, unfortunately. Well, you could, but probably not as well as you'd like to. And it's just been really, really key for us. We've been providing weekly updates, news, emails, and text messages to our teams. There have been some that have been put on furlough, but those who have worked all the way through, we've sent a weekly update, just providing people with what business updates on where we are with plans for repopulation. We've procured PPE. Face coverings are one of the things that you will now be seeing with our teams on Spinningfields, taking on board public health statement that the most vulnerable industries are cleaning and security, and also the most vulnerable demographic are the BME. So that probably factors in 75% of our demographic of our workers. So just providing that reassurance. We're putting our own protocols in place. So where we can, with the consent with the teams, when people start, we've got them on shift patterns anyway. So they work on a rota system. So we're breaking that contact with people. But part of our starting protocol now introduces a forehead thermometer temperature check. And anyone whose temperature exceeds 37.8, I think it is, we will be asking them to go and get tested. I think one of the critical or the challenges we've had is that in the industries for cleaning and security, they're predominantly hourly paid, and whereas people who are furloughed get 80% of their wage. You tell someone to go and self-isolate where there's no statutory, and they're expected to take statutory sick pay, giving them 25% of their wage. So as a team and as a business, we've agreed to pay our staff 50% of their wage whilst they go away and get tested, so that there won't be that reluctance for people to try and hide it, even though we have put checks in place to make sure we're, where possible, if the fever is a symptom, that we'll be able to catch that in the temperature checks.
Cool. Thank you very much, Gabe. Stick around for questions, please. Toby, should we talk about offices and office occupiers and I guess tenant fears and expectations as well?
Yeah, sure. It's been obviously it's been a really busy few months for FMs and property managers. CBRE manage office buildings, business parks across Manchester. We also have a large distribution centre at Hayward, which has been really busy. It's part of the sort of key supply chain. It's got a very busy truck stop there. So we've worked really hard to keep that site safe for all the activity over the last few months. Really back in February and March, we had sort of the pressure of dealing with the coronavirus when it was on our sites, including sort of procedures, cleaning, and all the reporting that came with it. We then saw quite a period of intense work while the sites reduced occupancy. All our focus was then on where we might be able to show some savings on our service charge for occupiers while the buildings were quieter. And now we've sort of really ramped up into the reoccupation work and planning about how we can make our buildings COVID safe. But echoing Gabriel, we really focused on our communication to our clients and occupiers. Like other managing agents, we've created a suite of reoccupation guides, specific ones for landlords, for the clients of the buildings, but also for our operational team. And we've tried to do some sort of clear, consistent messaging across that to make them quite easy to understand and also for our teams to implement. We've created an operational workbook for every one of our sites, and that actually has formed the basis of the site-specific risk assessment that the government's looking for sites to have. It's a live document. We're working very collectively, so we work in conjunction with the landlord, the property, with the people that are going to use the building, and with the surveyors and the property managers as well. I think, again, that's pretty important that we do that, and we really do work closely to get those changes and measures working for the whole building and not just particularly one occupier over another. While the office managers in offices have been looking at their own demises, we've been looking at common area points and facilities. We've been considering the flow sort of buildings, the flow of people around our sites. I think that's something that Graham and Tony are going to touch on in their presentation. But we've used the government guidance, but also our experience, because we've had some sites where through the lockdown they've carried on. We've got key workers working from them, so we've actually got some experience now of how we're going to need to deal with the higher occupancy when it does come back. I think we're probably going to see quite a few changes in the way buildings work. People are really going to have to work again collectively and together to make sure that they use the buildings in a safe manner. Can't police all the areas of the building. We don't have security to put on every floor and every lift. So similar to how we've seen in the sort of supermarkets, I think people are going to have to really sort of adjust and be very considerate of each other, look to keep the 2 metre distances. We're probably going to see perhaps etiquettes grow across the buildings of how you manage things. So when you get in a lift, you'll be asking the person, if you can get 2 people in the lift, are you going to the higher floor? So you better get in first. So I think that's going to come quite naturally, and we'll all get used to doing that sort of slightly awkward dance where you're trying to avoid the 2 metres. In terms of communication, we've had quite a few calls. We've used sort of video technology. So some of our building managers have walked our key office contacts around the receptions to show the sort of preparations we're making and how their journey might look and what might change. And that's been quite successful. We've also been sort of leaning quite heavily on our supply chain to react to the sort of new requirements, new equipment, similar to supermarkets. We've been looking at screens and receptions to help protect our team, increased amounts of sanitizer. I think one of the interesting things has been how quickly some suppliers have managed to adjust and been quite agile on their business, and these emails offering signage and sanitizers from firms that just didn't deal with that in the past. At the height of lockdown, the only people that could supply additional sanitizer were actually our M&E suppliers, who normally do all the sort of the PPM maintenance. So that was an interesting one. It was also World FM Day recently, and on the day I sent a message to all our supply partners that have continued to help service our building. I think the last few months have been really difficult for everyone, but I've been really grateful to the site teams that continue to work on site and make them safe for the occupiers. as we have had people still working that were key workers and carrying out critical tasks. I think we owe cleaners, guards and the site teams themselves a lot for carrying on these key roles all the way through lockdown. Just looking a bit about new lettings as well, we understand we saw quite a reduction in new inquiries coming through through the main lockdown period. But our office agents are now sort of seeing an increase in inquiries coming back into the market. We did have some sort of virtual viewings through lockdown, so we used virtual tour technology, but also again, some of the site-based teams walked around the building and the floor spaces and showed prospective occupiers what it would look like on their phones using FaceTime. So again, it's shown a real flexibility, I think, from the teams through this period. We've completed some major lettings, but whereas in the past the fit-out contractors would be sort of charging to get on site and the occupiers are really keen to get on, we have seen a bit of a delay due to the lockdown restrictions. But talking to fit-out contractors this week, they're starting to see that start to ramp up, and I think there's a bit of progression now of plans for people that did take new space to come back and come into the offices. So really, I think we've managed to adjust really well to the new ways of working. In terms of CBRE, I've been really, really impressed with how the company supported the teams working from home. They've put a lot of effort into keeping people engaged, motivated, and there's been a real focus on mental health among all the employees as well that are working from home and some working alone. From talking to our occupiers, I believe that I think that's a similar experience a lot of people have had, that they really have had a positive experience of having to work from home, and also many businesses continue to thrive. There's going to be a lot of people continue to work from home as the year goes on, but there are people out there who really are struggling a bit. Potentially they haven't got the space or they haven't got the resource to do the job they need to. So that's where we're focusing on now, really. We're making sure that our buildings are going to be safe for the people that do need to come back into the office, to have that really sort of environment. But it's going to be definitely reduced numbers. Talking to occupiers, I think in phase one we're probably looking about 20% of the people that used to work in the buildings maybe coming back in. There's going to be a lot of flexibility around it, and I think these first sort of stage will be quite crucial in understanding how building is going to work. And then, as Gabe said, we can sort of make adjustments. Our plans are very fluid. We're going to be live documents. We're going to constantly sort of potentially look at them and make some changes to make sure they do work for everyone. And then hopefully we can bring bigger numbers back in at that point.
Those numbers sort of starting coming back now, or are they? Is it sort of in a few weeks' time?
Probably in a few weeks' time. We're definitely communicating with occupiers. Everyone's being very, very cautious, I think, understandably, and quite careful. So we've not had the numbers back yet. I think potentially from next week onwards we might start to see them come.
Have there been, obviously you manage a number of different buildings from fairly historic ones to very modern ones. Have there been different challenges across different types of buildings? Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, we've got some new office buildings that got like really big reception that we can really do a lot with. Whereas some, even actually we've got quite a new building that's got a very small footprint. So it's got quite a small real pinch points. We've had to really look at how we can do a queuing systems. We're actually queuing out the door on that one. Undercover down the street. We're going to have to do that, I think, really at peak times. It's the lifts that are going to be the issue.
Yeah, I think that's a question for all of us, is if you've got lifts, certainly in our building, you're only going to have one person in a lift at a time. So what actually happens, even if you're telling people to come in an hour early to start queuing and going up in the lifts, that's going to be an interesting one, and possibly a little bit of a fractious issue as well, particularly if the weather's terrible and you're queuing outside.
Definitely. We're definitely going to encourage people to use the stairs where they can. I think that'll be one of the first points we'll do.
Yeah. And are you, in terms of tenants, are tenants already looking at and have plans underway to redevelop their own spaces or change their own spaces to make social distancing work?
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, they're working on that now.
And what sort of thing are they doing, and what are you seeing there?
Generally, sort of office configuration. The CBRE office has got a plan already about where people will be able to sit. It'll be very clearly marked out. As where we used to get maybe 6 or 8 on a pod desk, you're going to get 3 people now. And those plans are going to be very, very clear. There'll be a flow around the office. It's going to be a system around the office. So that those sort of plans are already far ahead.
And how much, in terms of the changes, when you're looking at the common areas, is sort of coming from you, and how much, are you having communication from tenants who are basically sort of saying, what are you doing? And we're not coming back in until we're absolutely happy and know that the entranceway and the lifts are going to be cleaned 7 times a day and whatever they may be requiring. I mean, how much is there a demand and a push from the tenants themselves?
Well, I think we've really tried to lead on that with the sort of the workbook and risk assessment. So we've done an initial review, and then we've done the calls with occupiers and explained our thinking, explained what we're planning, and then we've done a few tweaks from that. But on the whole, I think they've been quite positive on the reaction to what we're suggesting. They think it's going to work.
Cool. Thank you very much indeed. Tony, is it you up for Arup?
It is indeed, yes. I'll share my screen. Hopefully technology doesn't fail me.
We tested it, everybody, beforehand. We know it worked.
We did, but technology doesn't always work like that. That's right, so let's see. Can everyone see my screen?
I certainly can.
Cool. Right, I'll go for it. So I think that Toby's presentation was a nice segue into what I'm going to be just talking through. So my name is Tony Nichols. I'm a transport planner at Arup. I lead on pedestrian planning as a service that we offer from the Manchester office and more generally as an organisation. So we've consolidated some of our thoughts around some of the challenges that surround COVID-19 and the sort of subsequent relaxation of some of the measures that have been in place over the last couple of months, and focusing really on the, I guess, more generally, the approach we take as part of the pedestrian planning work we do, the experience that people have. So I guess people on this call will be building managers for offices, but there's all different types of buildings in the likes of Manchester, from venues, attractions, and obviously there's things around the nighttime economy that I guess are going to have particular challenges. So our general approach to pedestrian planning is to look at pedestrian journeys. So typically the bulk of the work we tend to do in pedestrian planning is around rail stations, and the questions that tend to need answering, if anyone's used platforms 13 and 14 at Piccadilly Station, it's around platform density and the infrastructure required to move people safely around rail stations and also as transport interchanges. So as a piece of work, it's prescribed by Network Rail that pedestrian modelling that I'll talk about a little bit later on in this presentation is something that needs to be done to understand what's called level of service that are prevalent within stations, and that ultimately gives you sort of heat maps and just picking up on a couple of points that Gabe and Toby have made around pinch points. It's that type of work that we tend to do at traffic changes. Also sort of stadiums as well. That's a prescribed piece of work as part of new stadiums and arenas. Over the last few years, there's been more work we've done in the likes of art galleries and cultural spaces, and also with retail as well, looking at the flow of pedestrian in front of buildings and what that means for sort of the level of charge you could sort of put in place for areas that have higher footfall compared to others. But one thing that COVID-19 is doing is I guess changing the questions that are already, I guess, prevalent within the pedestrian planning and people movement industry. So the requirements generally have been around density of people, and that is still a thing, but it's more around social distancing. So it's sort of 2 metre distancing is tends to be given a lot of thought around queuing. For example, anyone that's gone to a food store over the last few weeks understands what that means, and obviously to the experience you have just primarily from picking up your sort of weekly shop, as it were. So it's COVID is changing the questions that are already existing within the industry, and what challenges and outcomes that come off the back of it. And again, Gabe and Toby have sort of touched upon these, but I'll just give a brief overview of what we consider to be the I guess some of the primary issues that the likes of Toby, Gabe and others on this call will be, I guess, grappling with. So some of the new questions are around capacity, and so as I'll describe a little bit the work that we've done for our Liverpool office and going to be doing for our Manchester office is around maximum occupancy. So just picking up on that 20% comment that Toby made, we calculated for, oh, somebody's doing stuff. somebody taking charge. It's around the we calculated that you could get approximately 30% of people in our Liverpool office. But ultimately, there's all sorts of different questions that you need to ask around the building infrastructure. And one particular area you just touched upon is the lift capacity, and typically that is something that is going to be a particular challenge from a vertical circulation perspective. So yeah, it's looking at alternative options to look at the usage of stairs, for example. And if I used the Piccadilly Place building that Arup Manchester work in, it's sort of cunningly tucked at the back of the building, and you have to walk through the lift lobby to get to the building, to the stairs themselves. And historically, stairs within office blocks are generally designed to minimum requirements, depending on some of the fire engineering advice that is given. But so that there are also challenges with prescribing certain methods of ingress throughout buildings as well. And one of the things I'm sort of quite keen to sort of raise is the issue of monitoring capacity as well. A lot of buildings don't currently have facilities to understand areas of particular densities, or if there's a particular space, if you could get 100 people in, for example, how do you know when you're at 100 people? Is it 120 people? A lot will come down to the crowd management plan and the operational plan, but that is going to be a particular challenge for building owners as well. So one of the things is defining a queuing strategy, and it might be more relevant for the likes of Gabe in terms of the work that he's doing at Spinningfields. But what does that look like, and how does it interact with the public realm? A really key aspect is the communication. So it's not just the staff, it's the visitors, it's the workers that are going to be working in some of these office blocks and the different buildings in Manchester. If it's a visitor attraction, for example, it's providing information such as it's going to take 10 minutes to sort of transition through the queue, for example. Some people do sort of like that comfort of being informed. I'd say that a lot of people like that comfort of being informed about conditions of this nature. So looking to minimise the impact on the public realm would be particularly challenging at certain areas, thinking of Market Street, for example, and the likes of some of the bigger retailers around the tram stop, and what does that mean in an unconstrained environment. I don't know if anyone on this call has been engaging much with the City Council, but clearly there's impacts that go beyond the edge of buildings that they either manage, own, operate, or work at even. So yeah, this is just a visualization of what that looks like. So some of the things that you need, you've probably seen. Again, going back to the sort of food store aspect, so stanchions, floor markings, signage, so on and so forth. Yeah, signage, wayfinding and signage more generally is going to be a really key aspect of just giving people the information and enabling people to distance as best they can. So it's not just for queuing, it's for circulation as well. And as well, having a flexible model. So it might be that when you think you've got a plan that works on paper, the realities might be slightly different. So it's just in building that flexibility into an approach, which will be quite critical. And yeah, reinforcing social distancing. It's quite an interesting measure in its own right, because people have picked up on 2 meters. I've read various articles around. Actually, it should be more than 2 meters. I know in the likes of the Netherlands and Australia, they use 1.5 meters. But ultimately, that will be prescribed by central government and the sort of public health experts that are advised from that criteria. So if that is the main primary criteria that you should be spatially planning to, so there's effectively quite a number of things that come off the back of that. And yeah, just going on to that last bullet point there, the limiting the number of people in lifts, just in aggregation, vertical circulation for some of the higher rise blocks that we've got, but also picking up on the comment that Vaughan made around different building types. You've got listed buildings that weren't probably designed to do the function that they currently are used for. So to mention the criteria to enable social distancing, it might be extremely challenging. So just picking up again on some of the measures that Gabe has been looking at, Spinningfields, looking at union bi-directional sort of strategies around certain parts of the building, estates and buildings. That's something that we've looked at as part of the work that we've done in the Liverpool office. Ultimately, you could do a lot of this on a plan, but again, looking at what that looks like in reality is going to be a really key aspect, and monitoring it. We're all working to very immediate timescales, but to my mind, this is going to be something that's going to be prevalent within our thinking for a considerable amount of time. So it's how it fluctuates at different times of the week. If you do have a particular nighttime economy offer, and what do you need to do to potentially stop people going to certain parts of the state, that might be difficult to manage. So yeah, this is just a visualization of what we think you could make to work. So yeah, picking up on the communication is key, not just for visitors and staff outside of your organisation. A really key aspect is your own staff. Giving them the information to enable them to socially distance is going to be a really key aspect of your operational plan. From a health and well-being perspective, there's going to be levels of anxiety and stress that people have around returning to work. Obviously, there's been a lot in the media around the release of the lockdown, but there's going to be a different situation very soon for a lot of the buildings that people on this call do manage. From an Arup perspective, we've been doing this work for a considerable amount of time, and we have software which is called Mass Motion, which was initially developed in-house, but it's available to the market for the likes of architects and planners and transport planners to use. So it allows you to work in 3D to really pick up some of these pinch points and really use it not just as a design tool, but as a consultation tool. If there's particular anxiety from occupiers and people who might pay the bills, for example, at some of the offices that are managed by the likes of CBRE and Allied London and so on and so forth, there might be a level of consultation that might benefit from additional visualization of what you're trying to achieve. Over the past few weeks, we've also developed a proximity analysis tool, which enables you to look at certain criteria, particularly the 2 meter distancing and how what these pinch points look like, and the amount of time people spend within this 2 meter distancing, and how many times it happens over a given period of time. So we've really developed our thinking, and we're currently talking to museums in Liverpool about supporting them as they look to open in early July. Just touching on the Liverpool office example, yeah, so we've done a piece of work to look at what it means for the Liverpool office. Under normal circumstances and a normal situation, you can get 80 people in the office, and we are looking at a max occupancy of 25 people. We discussed a lot of the measures in advance of the modelling. Around vertical circulation, so lift areas and stair areas, reception areas, lounge areas. The office operates under agile working, so hot desking, paperless, all those sorts of things. And so we sort of prescribed a one-way system, but as this sort of visualization shows here, there was particular pinch points around a tea and coffee location, which we've advised probably is best to close down temporarily. But the bulk of the work was to look at how the office worked in aggregation, and looking at the particular pinch points, and inevitably the challenges around some of the sort of less or the more flexible periods around lunchtime. So it's the developing a strategy around eating food at your desks and trying to minimize exposure by going outside. Obviously, there's a health and well-being aspect to that, and in terms of people getting out of the desk and out of the office and into fresh air and all those sorts of things. So I guess it's merging the plan from a modelled perspective and putting it into a real life perspective, and something that Toby, Gabe, and everyone on this call will be thinking about actually how does it work in reality, and if we need to potentially change things, how can we? What are some of the measures that we need to implement? So we've got I've got a video here of the proximity tool. So this brings us to the end of the presentation. So it's got a voiceover. So I'll shut up temporarily. Although I don't know if it's over. Can anyone confirm if they can?
Can't hear it.
I can't hear you, Tony. No.
No, I knew technology would fail me at some point. So this is, I guess, a sort of visualization of different situations whereby you look at some of the measures that might need to be implemented. So, for example, on the one just previously, it was the queuing system outside a building. It might be an office building in Spinningfields. It might be an office building wherever in the city centre, and look at what are some of the actual residual impacts from a visual perspective, and we've also developed some of our thinking around some of the behavioural aspects and how people choose to distance within the buildings themselves. So this is what I'd consider to be an airport example. If I go back. So this is a good example of just from a spatial planning perspective, if you do already have a queuing system, what does it look like with 2 metre distancing? So from a very simplistic perspective, there's very quick and easy things you could do to use this modelling software to easily understand what does it mean from a spatial planning perspective, but then what does it mean from an activity perspective. So if it normally takes you 10 minutes to go from the back of the queue to the front of the queue, does that then increase to 20 minutes under broadly normal circumstances where demand has gone back to an existing level? So yeah, I don't know if you normally tend to distribute slides, Vaughan and Alex, but it'd be useful if those on the call wanted to just hear what the voiceover is saying about the development of the software itself. But yeah, that sort of brings me to the end of the presentation and the types of work that could be done. One thing I would say is the work from a more planning and people movement perspective is very scalable. So going back to the comments made by Gabe and Toby, you could do a lot of it on a PDF plan. What this analysis does from a 3D visualization perspective is really help you understand the micro nature of what some of the pinch points might look like, and that isn't necessarily something that I would advocate to do at all buildings because it's not possible and it's not relevant, but there might be some particular buildings that people on this call might be interested in looking at certain aspects of how they operate and operate under normal circumstances or with an increased amount of people.
Excellent.
So that's it.
Thank you very much, Tony. And though this will be available as a video recording, if there's a link to those slides, we can also distribute that as well. Gabe, bringing you back in, one of the things that's come up a few times from people is what are you going to do if either in the public realm or in your offices, people are just not wanting to comply? I mean, how do you deal with that? It's not in offices at the moment. Obviously, you have got security guards, but their powers with this, even for the police, are limited. So how do you deal with that process?
Yeah, I think that's one of the key things that we've kind of looked at, and we've been on Zoom calls with Greater Manchester Police, and we understand that there's no real enforcement that can be put in place for this. So we're just hoping that by being really open and communicating what our proposals are and our strategies are with our occupiers and making them aware of the potential consequences, not saying that people are idiots, but when we understand that people have been living under quite draconian protocols for the last 10 weeks or so. So it's all about working collaboratively and asking people to do what they need to do and be considerate of others. Our teams will be talking to people and just making suggestions and highlighting and pointing out the signage that will be in place, encouraging people to social distance. We're also factoring in that people will still want to smoke, and we have quite a big smoking community on Spinningfields, so we've added additional smoking points on the estate to help facilitate that. We've put markings on benches to suggest where they can sit and how many people can sit. But in terms of radically policing people who are non-compliant, it's something that we will ask people to do stuff, and if they don't, we'll just pick it up with, if they're occupiers in the estate, we'll pick it up with their businesses.
And some of the changes that you're having to make, I guess, for the next 2, 4, 6 months or whatever, you know, number of toilets that are open, those sort of things, having deliveries, all of that sort of thing. I mean, do you have a return to normal plan, or are you just having to roll with this, see how it goes, and develop as it goes along?
So we've in our heads, we've got a three-stage strategy. Initial stage is the initial return to work, where we see a minimal return to work from occupiers. I think a lot of the businesses now have found that they can work from home predominantly. They've had to change the circumstances, and there's been a real reluctance for people to just rush back into business as usual. So that's the first phase, where we anticipate 10 to 20% of people returning. But we have asked people to communicate when they're considering to return, so that we can factor that into our strategies. And if the numbers that are being indicated by the property managers and the office managers are higher than what we anticipated, then we would have to offer it. The second phase is when a larger number would start coming in and the F&B bars start opening and operating. We need to consider how are we going to support our F&B operators to make sure that they can still trade. I think Gareth and Rob could probably bear me witness that most F&B operators' bottom line is based on bums on seats, and social distancing isn't going to be favourable for their business projections. So we're looking at how we can liaise with licensing, talk about how we can increase their outdoor seating areas. It's quite a strict, rigid protocols of where you can consume alcohol in Manchester City Centre. So I'm hoping to have conversations about what assistance or alleviations from those prescriptions can be agreed and deviated from on a temporary basis, just to support businesses and make sure that businesses don't go under. And the final stage is the look to return back to normal, which we don't see happening this year. I think it's something that we're looking at in 2021, and then we can start to look to reduce measures and bring businesses back to normal. But in the interim stage, in the second phase, we're looking on how we can activate the space without attracting crowds, and still encourage people to come down, to make sure that they can, the F&B operators can still operate a sustainable business.
Yeah, hopefully F&B starting to operate from mid-July, but what form that is, obviously we don't yet know. Toby, I think one of the things that's come up a lot, and I guess one of the things we don't want to lose, is been a bigger demand for things like cycling and obviously pedestrian use and so on. When you're looking at estates or when you're looking at buildings, how much is that already starting to have an impact on sort of future provision? Is there more demand for more showers, more demand for more cycle parking spaces on the estates, more demand for cycle parking and so on?
Yeah, I think we've had some occupiers that have tried to reduce parking, but I think they're going to want to ramp that up quite quickly, because there will be a slight move away at the moment from public transport to try and make that journey a bit safer, I think. We're definitely going to see more people wanting to cycle. One building, we've already just had a sign off from the client to increase our cycle facilities, so the clients are already starting to respond to that. Yeah, the showers will be tricky, because there's the sort of smaller areas. We're going to have to. We're talking, some buildings are talking about booking system on them, so that will be an issue, I think. If a lot of people start cycling in, the showers will have to be looked at quite closely.
And do you see, if you're starting to look ahead 1, 2, 3 years or whatever, I mean, the impact that this is going to have on new buildings that are going up and new office spaces that are developing? Sort of what are we going to see in terms of gradual changes or major changes?
I think it's a bit early potentially for that at the moment. I'm sure there's a lot of work going on in the background looking at the future planning, but currently at the moment we are just really fully focused on getting people back to a certain extent. But if this carries on, it is likely to see that in the future, I think.
Cool. Gabe, you wanted to come in on that? Yeah,
obviously, Spinningfields, we operate the public realm, and one of the things that I've always seen as a big challenge is encouraging people not to use public transport, and the push for cycling into work, understanding the limitations of cycling, storage, and shower facilities, and the onerous task of having to refresh and clean to make them COVID-proof. I'm just interested to see how that will work. I think, from my perspective, not a lot of buildings can accommodate a great influx of cyclists coming in. So it's perhaps worth having conversations. You can't carpool anymore. So in terms of reducing and providing people with reassurance, I think we're going to see a lot of vehicles starting to come back into the city.
Yeah, there are a number of conversations underway for those who haven't heard around cycle parking on the edge of the city and how that can be done, and you know how that can work together. Or as Alex has just said to me, maybe encourage gentle cycling so people don't sweat and they don't need to change the end of it. I think sometimes in the Manchester weather you're probably going to need a warm shower at the end of it. Well, that's another thing that you are going to need. Toby, also in the longer term, do you think, given there's going to be more cleaning in place, there's going to be more things that have to happen in common areas, is this actually going to, absolute bottom line, but is this going to affect service charges in the longer term that businesses will have to take care of?
Yeah, we've seen a period of where we try to reduce, where we have the lower occupancy. So potentially over this service charge year, we might see it flatten out because there might be some additional stuff coming now with cleaning, signage, consumables. But this year, I think it won't be too badly affected. Depends how long it takes for the buildings to get back up to full occupation. So things like energy use, well, we've got a slightly reduced occupation as well that might balance that out.
Just to finish off then, Toby first, and then each of the rest of you. I mean, if you have a building or you are a tenant, I mean, what's sort of the one lesson that you would have in terms of what you need to think about in terms of preparing for the return and for post-COVID?
I personally think from the office point of view is just to get all your sort of everything ready. I mean, we've been through it once. It was very, very reactive, reacting daily from what was happening. From it, we've created a whole range of documents for communicating with occupiers when there's potentially cases. There might be a case in the building or someone's unwell with symptoms. So we've literally got that whole suite of documents now ready. So it's getting them all prepared, because if this does spike, as they say it might again, and may come back again, at least we'll be a bit more ready. So the officers should really have that all in place.
Cool, thank you. Tony, what about you in terms of being aware of how people flow around? What's the one thing that people need to be aware of as they're sort of planning for that return, and even if it's at 20%, what do they need to be aware of and looking out for?
Yeah, I think it might be a comment more aligned to the retail sector, but I guess managing expectation and monitoring. It's using my example of going to Aldi and queuing outside rigidly 2 metre distancing, and then going on to aisle 1 where there's a pallet and having to figure your way around that. And actually the occupancy of the building is probably, there's too many people in there. I think it's not overlooking your as a building manager and operator, it's not overlooking your what you should be doing from a risk management perspective, and just managing expectation from that perspective, I think.
And you probably can't ever have too much communication with those who are waiting in queues and waiting for
definitely not. Yeah, definitely not.
I think one of the challenges I think is going to be an interesting one is everybody is going to have their own comms in the next few weeks and few months, and there's going to be a chaos of signage. So, but we will manage that. That's part of our job. Gabe, from your point of view, what was sort of the one big lesson as you've gone through this that you'd want to pass on?
I think everyone's touched upon it. I think communication is absolutely critical. I think touched on 5 points of communication that we focused on in terms of occupiers, members of the public, members of the team. I think looking after your team members and just providing them with reassurance, it's a requirement for everyone to do a risk assessment now. So that needs to be done and shared. And any retraining, people who've been furloughed and who've been out of your business, you should consider re-inductions, making them familiar with the protocols and answering any frequently asked questions or any niggling doubts. Well-being and mental health is one that I've noticed is becoming huge, not just people who were working, but just generally being stuck at home and in lockdown. It's having different impacts on people. So just being considerate about people who might be slightly anxious coming back into work and might ask questions which might seem obvious.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We're pretty well bang on time. So thank you to everyone for coming. Only a few questions, so I hope that was useful for everybody. More information and link to guidelines can be found on the CityCo website, which is cityco.com. We've got a whole section on easing of lockdown, broken down by retail, nighttime economy, offices, and so on. So going through there, we'll link to government guidance and best practice and so on. We'll be putting this up on YouTube later, and also sending around a transcript, so you can wallow in all the detail to your heart's delight, should you want to do that. Future briefings for us, we have a briefing later today that is with retailers, particularly those retailers who've been open over the last few weeks, to just talk through best practice. We're doing that actually as a YouTube one, so we can get a little bit more in depth. So we've got 3 retailers, and then we will put that out on YouTube and up on the CityCo site. So please watch that, because that can be really interesting, and how queuing actually works in practice, how people deal with conflict resolution and so on. And then the next open Q&A for members and other businesses in the city centre is next Wednesday, which is the 3rd, I believe. It's 2 p.m, and that's with TFGM. And we'll be talking obviously about what the transport restrictions are, what's going to happen in transport over the next couple of weeks, trams, buses and roadways particularly. And I know there's a lot of interest in that. That's going to be one of the major limiting factors in the return to the city. And then on the 15th, we have Sir Richard Leese talking, I think, at 4 o'clock, and that will be the day that the city sort of reopens, as retail reopens on the 15th. We're also looking to get another nighttime economy briefing in at some point during the week of the 8th, I believe. So keep an eye on the comms that we're putting out and on the CityCo website. Thank you once again for joining us, and have a good day.